Hello. Hello to all of the fabulous people jumping into the room on this lovely Tuesday. I'm so happy to see you all. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Daily Antidote of Song as we rapidly come to the end of year one and ready ourselves to move into year two of the Daily Antidote. For anybody who's new to us today, we're here every day at noon, singing one song together, having some fun chat, and growing, learning, bonding as a community, and getting things done out there in the world, which is one of the most amazing things about this great community. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm super glad that you're here. And I want to say hello to everybody out there on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us today. And to the gang in the room, hello, of course, to Nora, who's singing with us today. Hello to Aaron, who's running the tech for us. Hello, Sheila in Florida, Becky in Vancouver. Hello, Annie. Hello, Aloysius in Mass, and Susan in Ohio, and Sarah in Texas. Hello, Suzanne, maybe new to us today. Nice to see you. Hello, Sandy in the Yukon. Hello, Al. Nice to see you today. And hello, Dennis in Vancouver. Hello, Dion. Nice to have you coming in from Mass. Jenny, hello. Nice to see you. Carolyn in Idaho. Arlene in California. Jim in New York. Kate in Charlottesville. Hello, Deli in Maryland. Hello, Bonnie in Idaho, Storm in Mass, Dan in Virginia, Mabel in Mass, and a cinnamon bear behaving itself, I see. Hello, Jean, nice to see you today. Glad you're here. Hello to Bob, nice to have you with us today. Hello, Peter Amadon, really glad you're in the house with us today, one of our regular song leaders. Hello to Susan, nice to see you today, and Kevin in New Hampshire. Barbara, hello. Pete and Janet, or at least the Pete half in Toronto, nice to see you. Hello, Luda, without Mark, nice to see you today. Hello, Lynn, great to have you today, coming in from Connecticut. Annette in California, Nancy's Irish Cow in Washington, Caroline in DC, Trish in Vancouver, Dennis and Judy, or at least the Judy half, nice to have you today, I think Ohio. Deborah in Kentucky, hello, be careful with that driving and listening. Hello to Sue in California, Valerie in Kentucky, Anne in Maryland, Dick and Kathy in Victoria, also regular song leaders, glad you're here today. Julie in Ontario, hello. Nancy in Vermont, Jamie in Victoria, Bob in Mass, hello. Cinnamon Bear Free, I see. Hello, Barbara. Hello, Martha in Oregon, Sandy in Maryland, hello. And okay, deep breath, everybody ready? Thank you. Hello, Susan in Seattle. I'm so glad so many folks are joining today. We have such a neat program for us today. Hello, Tom in Victoria. Hello, Nora. Wait, that's not Nora because Nora's somewhere else. Hello, Jane. Nice to see you, Jane. I think that must be Nora's mom. Hello, Betsy, and hello, Jennifer. Nice to see you today. Hello, Jane, and hello, folks off video, Sandra and Sarah, Gina, Miriam, Isabel, Leslie, Amos. Hello, Gwen and Heather, Suzanne, Cricket, Kachina. So glad so many of you are all here today. And I also want to shout out that Jennifer is another one of our regular song leaders, Jennifer Cutting of Ocean Orchestra, who goes with Steve Winnick, our hosts and conspirators on the American Folklife Center Archive Challenge Weeks, Betsy, who is the music director at Washington Rebels, and Dennis Donnelly, who is with the Ubuntu Choirs Network, who are going to be doing a partner week with us in April. So much excitement, so much exciting, happy things coming up in this upcoming year. It's kind of funny to be celebrating what feels like a new year in the middle of whatever month this is. What month is this? See, okay, pandemic brain. Are we in March? We're in March. Woo, thank you. I'm so happy to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. For anybody who's new to us, the lyrics will be in the chat. There'll be links for finding out more info on the artist in the chat. And my email address is in the chat. If you want to be in touch for any reason, you can email me. We have a daily antidote email list that you can join to get the lyrics and the artist in advance. Okay, so I am super excited today to have in the room with us Nora Rhodes, a wonderful, amazing singer who we learned about and met through Steve and Jen's Archive Challenge Week. She came and sang a ballad with us. She has sung with us once, I think, another time at Christmas, maybe at a cocktail party. And she's just absolutely amazing. She is coming in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She is 18 years old, and we'll get to chat a little bit more with her after the song to find out a little bit more about what makes an 18-year-old come into ballad singing. Nora, so excited to have you with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your song so we can sing with you? Welcome.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I'm thrilled to be back and to be able to lead you all in song again. So, since we're concluding Women's History Month, I decided to bring a cotton mill song and a little bit of history about the young women mill workers and about Sarah Bagley. So, the song that I brought is Cotton Mill Girls, which might be the most famous of the songs which give voice to and honor the suffering and strength of the factory mill girls and of young women like Sarah Bagley who tenaciously fought for humane working conditions. I first heard this song sung by Hetty West in an episode of Pete Seeger's Rainbow Quest, which was recorded in 1966. And so I think I've got an audio clip to share with you if we can share that. Thanks.
I worked in the cotton mill all my life, ain't got nothing but a Barlow knife. It's a hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. It's a hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere.
Okay, so that was Hetty West, and she was an American folk singer who was very popular during the revival, alongside, Judy Collins and Joan Baez. And so the picture of her standing was from the Newport Folk Festival in 1964, and the other photograph was from her appearance on the Rainbow Quest. All right, so I think I can sing the chorus a couple times, and you can all join in with me. Maybe I'll sing it 3 times, and then you can join on the second and third times just to make sure we've all got it, and then I can lead us all in the full song if that's okay with everybody. Okay, let me get my note. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Okay, maybe just one more time just to make sure it's all good. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Okay, now I will sing the whole thing. Just gonna get a drink first. Well, I've worked in the cotton mills all my life. I ain't got nothing but a Barlow knife. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. In 1815 we heard it said, move to cotton country and get ahead. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Us girls work 14 hours a day for 13 cents of measly pay. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times every day. Sorry, I'm sorry. They raised our wages up half a cent. Poor old girls didn't know what it meant. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. And they raised our wages half a cent more, but goods went up a nickel at the company store. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. And when I die, don't bury me at all. Just hang me up on the spinning room wall. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. And place a bobbin in my hand so I can spin in the promised land. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Thanks.
Woo! Nora, thank you so much. That was absolutely fun to sing and super refreshing to have something that was kind of easy to pick up and just be able to sort of zen along with. And your voice is mesmerizing and completely beautiful. And it's such a treat to sing with you. Thank you so much for being here and for bringing that. So I know you have a few more slides. Should we start with those?
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to use the slides to give a little bit more background about the cotton mills and about Sarah Bagley. Okay. All right, so cotton mills began to appear in America at the end of the 18th century as the Industrial Revolution began to take hold of the country. And the boot mills in Lowell, Massachusetts were not built until 1835, but they would make Lowell the most prominent mill city in New England. These mills were massive and employed over 8,000 workers. This brought many young women looking for work into the city of Lowell. Can we have the next slide, please? Thanks. The textile mill work was hard and the conditions were terrible. The girls worked 13 or 14 hours a day. And in the constant press to work quickly, young women lost fingers and even hands to the gears. Poor ventilation and continuous exhaustion led to increasing illness, especially in the winter, and many women contracted influenza, tuberculosis, and typhoid fever. At the end of each 6-day week, the girls received a meager $3 or $4, which was barely enough to cover the cost of a shared bed in an overcrowded room and some food in the company boarding house. Can I have the third slide, please? Okay, so Sarah Bagley was born in 1806, and unlike most of the young girls starting work at the mills, she was nearly 30 years old when she first joined Hamilton Mill in 1837. By 1844, conditions had grown so terrible that the women began to organize and formed the Lowell Female Labor Reform Association with Sarah as its president. The movement spread quickly, and the women began to publicly protest for a reduction to a 10-hour day, and they began to print a trades paper, The Voice of Industry, to tell their stories. In 1846, Sarah took their formal petition to the Massachusetts legislature. But her pleas for reform of the prison factories were rebuffed by the senator's conclusion that labor is intelligent enough to make its own bargains and look out for its own interest without any interference from us. It would take another 7 years of petitioning and protest until, in 1853, a new Massachusetts constitution regulated mill work days to 11 hours. All right, that's what I had for the slideshow, just to give you some background. So that's why I was so interested in studying Sarah Bagley when I was learning about the cotton mills, because I felt like her work was very impressive. And I felt like the song was also very important because of the way that it sort of memorialized her work and also the conditions in the cotton mills. Joe, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Nora. Aaron, you can go ahead and take the screen share down. And Nora, that was really great. That was a really great little sort of step into history. And I know that Lowell, Massachusetts is actually sort of on the map for having had the organization, the labor organization that happened back in the 30s and 40s, long before a lot of other organizing happened, and women in particular organizing before they even had the right to vote, and then of course forming some of the first unions. All of this by women. So it's a great way of looking at the history of ways in which women organized and gave themselves a voice, and sort of insisted on being equal players, or being movements for being equal players. So tell us a little bit more, if you can, about Sarah and her life and the ways in which she was active in organizing.
Well, I think it probably helped that she was a little bit older when she joined the other working girls, because she had some more education than most of the people working there, and so from the very beginning, before she began to work against the mill companies, she was already trying to help the other women, trying to help them with their education, and despite the fact that they were working all hours, she was trying to teach them to read and to write and things like that. And then when the conditions began to be so horrible that it couldn't be overlooked, and she helped the women to organize, and she helped the women to tell their stories and to get it circulated. And she went to the courts with petitions, and her work eventually did lead to the changing laws as to the labor laws, which was immensely important. And even afterwards, she continued to try to help people as much as she could through the rest of her life.
That's great, Nora. So some of the things, I was interested in her when you said you were going to be teaching us a little bit about her. She's not someone I knew about before, and it's always fun to find women in history who were such a presence or such a force. I think it's really inspiring to women everywhere to be reminded of how many folks were out there at different points, making some noise, making some good trouble. So Sarah Bagley, it looks like, also ended up in a career in medicine. I saw something online that said that she had a theory that was to charge $1 to the rich and free to the poor. Can you talk a little bit about how that sort of fits into her overall sense of activism?
Yes, well, that fits very much with who she was as a person, because, she very much did try to fight for, equality, including equality of resources, which is part of what that is. Because a lot of the people around her, a lot of her, her fellow workers couldn't afford, to have proper care for, when they were sick and when they needed food and things like that. So I think it fits very much in with her own experiences as well as with her own morals.
That's great. Thank you. The other piece that I had seen was that she got a job at some point in her life, I think later in her life, working for what was at that point, I think, new telegraph machines, and was frustrated upon start of her job to learn that she was going to make 3/4 of the amount that the man that she was replacing had been making. And it sort of speaks to, that's a long time ago. That's, 1840s, 1850s, who knows, 1860s by that point in her life. And yet there is still some inequality of pay today that we see out there. And so although it was a long time ago, it's one of those sort of, we talk about this in this room a lot, those things that we're still fighting for. We wish we weren't singing the same songs, having to make the same sense, but here we are still working for some of those same things. Of course, it's gotten better, but there's room for improvement, as with so many of the things we talk about in here. Nora, that was amazing. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about any other women sort of in the folklore world, or as you've gone through ballad singing that you've run into that you think are inspiring?
Well, a lot of my more scholarly work into traditional music has been centered around women collectors or women source singers, because that's been my focus for the past few years in studying archival collections. And so most recently, I've been working on a study of Emma Dusenberry, who was a very impressive source singer in Arkansas, in rural Arkansas, at the beginning of the 20th century. Um, And her collection at the Library of Congress is quite extensive, and her repertoire was immensely varied and immensely important. Um, and so that's my most recent study, and I continue to be awed by her every day as I learn more about her life and her music. And I've studied several collectors from the same time period, such as Helen Hartnett Flanders or Eloise Hubbard Linscott, who have collections at the Library of Congress and who are very different women, especially those two. And I think, they were very important, especially Linscott, who was very much working by herself and towards her own goals in preserving the music. And I think they don't get as much recognition as a lot of the male collectors, and I think they certainly had many more challenges than the male collectors at the time. Um, I guess that's sort of a long answer, but
it's a great answer. Thank you. Can you say a little tiny bit about how you, at the age of now 18, and I think you've been doing this for some years, how you managed to find yourself in what would seem potentially an unlikely role of being a ballad singer, and sort of how you came into it and what your plans are with it?
Well, I grew up listening to very varied types of music because my parents have very broad musical tastes. And I would listen to a lot of Joan Baez. And so when I was 9 years old, I wanted to start singing ballads because I heard Joan Baez singing them. And they reminded me very much of the folk tales that I grew up with, which were a huge part of my childhood and I was very passionate about. So I started singing traditional music then. I started singing ballads. And it was, I guess, 2 years after that that I met Jennifer and Steve at Augusta at the traditional music program there. And that was how I got more interested in, traditional music archives. And I think that both the performance and the archival study will feature heavily in my plans for the future because I hope to major in ethnomusicology eventually, and so I certainly hope to continue both traditional music performance and traditional music study throughout the rest of my career and my life.
That's great. Thank you. So we actually have one of our resident ethnomusicologists in the room, Jennifer Cutting, who you've been mentioning. I'm going to unmute Jennifer and see if she wants to join in the conversation. Hi, Jen.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Nora. Good job.
Oh, thanks.
Nora is one of our Henry Reed Fellows. She applied for the Henry Reed Fund and won against quite some stiff competition. And she is getting funding to come study the source singer Emma Dusenberry, whom she mentioned already. It's been a little challenging because she hasn't been able to come into our reading room because of the pandemic. The reading room's been closed, but there have been a flurry of email, and we scan and digitize as much as we can to get to her. So the other thing I wanted to tell you about was that the American Folklife Center, in one of our early field collecting projects, went to Lowell, Massachusetts, speaking of Lowell, and we made that the focus of a systematic folklife survey where we studied the folklore and folklife of all the ethnic groups living in Lowell, Massachusetts. It called the Lowell Folklife Project. It's been used, the things we collected in Lowell have been used by everybody from food historians. I remember this great interview with an elderly Portuguese baker who talked about how they used to make Portuguese bread and pour molasses on it because the butter and the molasses would sink into the craters in the Portuguese bread because it had bigger holes than other bread. So, I mean, it's useful for all kinds of scholars and researchers and just personal interest too. If you have any connection to Massachusetts and Lowell and the textile mills, or, Portuguese Americans, there's a lot in the Lowell Folklife Project collection. And I did put the link to the Lowell Folklife Project collection in the chat.
Thank you, Jen. That's really great. that Lowell Folk Music Project is amazing. So I love how all of these things twist and turn. I used images from the Lowell Folk Music Project in some of my work at the Library of Congress. And you said, Jen, something about, if you have a tie to Lowell, but I would say you don't need a tie to Lowell to actually find your people in the world, because one of the Lowell images inspired me to create a flyer that said, your folk live here at the American Folklife Center, because no matter who you are or what your background is, there are folks in there at the Folklife Center whose people speak to your history and some way or another. And it's a really fascinating thing, and the Lowell one in particular, because it was working with so many ethnic groups that had resettled in America and were making their own new culture, which was not the culture from back home, wherever they came from, but was tied into their new culture here. Thank you, Jen. That was great. Also, a shout out to the National Council for the Traditional Arts that produces one of the national folk festivals, started in Lowell some many years ago and is now the Lowell Folk Festival. And if you don't have a tie to Lowell, you can make a tie to Lowell by going to the Lowell Folk Festival, which is an amazing event and celebrates all of that ethnic diversity in music and craft and dance, and it's completely amazing and free. So thank you so much, Jen, for jumping in, and Nora, thank you so much for all of that. Just one last question before we ask you to sing again. Can you tell us a little bit about the links that we've put into the chat for you?
Oh, yes. So I included 2 links with more information about Sarah Bagley for anybody who wants to know more about her work with activism in the cotton mills and more about her background. And then I also included a link to Hetty West's appearance on Rainbow Quest, at the beginning of which she sings Cotton Mill Girls, and another to her singing Cotton Mill Girls on one of her albums. And then I guess there's also a link to my YouTube channel, which does not have much yet because it's very new, but yes.
I love it. Nora, thank you so much. I can't wait to explore your YouTube channel, even if it only takes a few minutes. And we look forward to all the things you add to it in the upcoming years. And quite honestly, Nora, I have no idea what your actual plans are for what you would do with your ethnomusicology or whatever else you do. But I hope somewhere in there it includes teaching or sharing in some way, because that ability to present culture in the way that you do and that you just did in here is so amazing. It's such a unique gift. And thank you so much for bringing all of that here for us today.
Thank you very much, Joe.
How would you feel about singing again?
Good. Yes, I think we should do that. Should I just sing the chorus a few times and we can all sing the chorus a few times together?
Anything you want to do is perfectly fine. I don't think anyone's going to argue for however long it is you like to sing. More is always great.
Okay. All right, so let's just sing a few choruses together then. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere.
Thank you so much, Nora. That was awesome. And I got a little teeny harmony going on the last one through. It was really fun. So for anybody who might have come in late, go ahead and go back to the Facebook Live to watch this again. And now you can practice your harmonies up front now. Once you get through it once, they can keep finding all those different harmonies. Nora, that was completely beautiful. Thank you so much. Can we all please give a huge thank you to Nora for an amazing song and an amazing Women's History Month life lesson. And Nora, we can't wait to sing with you again sometime in year 2. Woohoo! And Erin, thank you so much for running the tech today. I know it was trickier and you did a great job. And thank you to everybody out there on Facebook Live for joining us today. Please join us again tomorrow. If you're out there on Facebook Live, my email is in the chat and you are welcome to email and be in touch for any reason. And to everybody in this room also, thank you so much.